Okay, so it's live. Hey, and it's noon, my time. Y'all are watching it maybe in other places. Great. I guess I should just start. We can be timely about this. So welcome to my first ever virtual book reading. I've never done this before. I thank Kate, who's my technical director behind the scenes. And yeah, okay. So I'm just going to kind of dive in. I figure some people will be coming on as we go, but welcome to my virtual book reading. A lot of times when I give readings or do talks, I often begin with, I'm very honored to be here, which I am. If I'm like in your bedroom or your living room right now, wherever you are, I'm honored to be there. As for me, I am in my closet. This book reading has put me back in the closet. Which is where I'm recording from. And of course, that brings up a question that you may have, which is, Julia, why is there a large Hitachi with a banana slug on it? What's that all about? Well, funny you should ask, because this is the image from my first novel, my debut novel, as they say, 99 Erics, a Kat Cataclysm faux novel. So it's not really a novel, it's a faux novel, and for reasons that become clear as you read it. So I figured that I would begin by saying a few things about the book. I'm sure some people here are maybe have read the book. Some people have maybe heard me talk about it but haven't read it and are kind of curious. You're 99 Eric's curious. And others of you may just like have popped onto my page and you're just randomly here in this live stream and you didn't know you'd be at a book reading, but you are now. So I figured that for everyone to get on the same page, just a little bit of background and then I'll get into it more. So if you're interested, if you are 99 Eric's curious, I encourage you can go to this page, which is my website. And if you go to my website, you'll find links to 99 Erics. This is the 99 Erics webpage, so juliaserano.com, and you'll find it there. And from here, you can read a lot of the description. There are links to buy it. There are links to download for free the first 5 chapters of the book. So that's kind of cool. There are also, if you scroll down lower, there are all these excerpts that you can read. There's nice things people have said about the book there. And there's also in the little orange box, you will find that there's links to these virtual book readings. I'll be doing a second book reading on September 2nd. Not September 2nd, that would be back in time, September 22nd. And that's actually the eve of Bi Plus Visibility Day, and that's on purpose. The theme for that reading will be on bisexuals, weirdos, and unusually queer book characters, which that's a whole theme of the book, trying to write a book that's very queer in its sensibilities, and yet it's kind of about a character who dates, a female character dates lots of men. So I kind of wanted to kind of play with that, and I'll be talking about that at the second book reading, but not this one. So this one, the theme for this one is called On Writing About Writing, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. I should also say I haven't even given it a proper like blurb. Like you might be like, well, what's this 99 Erics book about? And so kind of my elevator pitch is it's about Kat Cataclysm, who's an ethically non-monogamous, bisexual female absurdist short fiction writer. And it's about her adventures and or misadventures writing a book called 99 Erics, which is about her experiences dating 99 different people named Eric. It's more surreal than slutty, not that there's anything wrong with slutty. So that's kind of the little quick synopsis. And I'll explain it is kind of a book within a book. And the reason for that will be clear as over the next couple minutes, I'm just going to share kind of how the book came about, which will kind of make sense of where the kind of bizarre premise stems from. So, and if I'm looking over here, it's because I have some notes over here, and that's why. So sometimes I've been asked over the years, it's like, Julia, have you ever wanted to write a novel? And the answer to that is yes. And this is actually my third attempt at writing a novel. The first two didn't really pan out. The first time I tried to write a novel was in the late 90s. I wrote this, what was a short story that blossomed into an unfinished novel. It was called Bigger, and it will never see the light of day. And it was kind of like the Kat Cataclysm book. It was silly and surreal, and it was a lot of fun to write. But what happened was I transitioned, and which the transition had nothing to do with me stopping writing, but I became really involved in trans activism. Then that really took up a lot of, pretty much all of my writing interests for like the following decade. And kind of going back to that book now, I don't really have any desire to finish it, but it was a really good practice. And then the second one was in the early 2010s. I started to write a novel that I was real excited about. It's a time travel plot. I think it's awesome. I would really love to see it happen one day. And I did what you're supposed to do. I read all the books about how to write a novel, and I wrote outlines. I came up with backstories, complex backstories for all my characters. It was all ready to go. And then once I started writing it, it sucked. It really sucked. The writing was really stiff. It felt contrived. And even worse than that, I wasn't having any fun writing it. And I was just kind of stuck with that for a bit. And that was just kind of in the back of my mind. And then, this is how 99 Erics happened. It was 2014, which, if you'll remember, that was the transgender tipping point time, where there was a lot of trans visibility, especially in the media, and there are all these TV shows that had trans characters. And so what happened was, I had somebody from one of these TV shows that has trans characters on it reached out to me about writing. I had never in my life thought about writing TV before. And but it was a thing. I was like, that could be interesting. So, but what I needed to do, I needed to send my resume, but I also needed to send a short story. And I didn't have any short stories. And so I decided that I would write one, and I wrote a short story over the weekend. And I didn't want to do a serious thing or a trans-themed thing because I figured they already knew that I could do those things. So I figured I wanted to do something like maybe something funny and maybe not trans. So I randomly over the weekend just started typing. This signifies typing. And what came out of me was what ultimately became the first chapter of 99 Erics. It's currently called Eric number 1. That wasn't the title at the time. But I suppose I should just start with that. That seems like a good place for me to start. So I'm going to be switching back and forth. So I can no longer see myself, but I have object permanence, so I'm assuming you can still see me. Okay, so Eric number 1. I always wanted to be a novelist, like ever since I was 26. I even bought all these how-to books on the subject, and they all said the same thing. Put your characters into conflict. And not just once or twice, but like in every single chapter. And I am the queen of conflict avoidance. When my friends suggest trying out some new German restaurant, I'll cheerily say, sure. And I will actually sit there and I will eat the red cabbage and spatzel just to avoid a potential disagreement. So I couldn't possibly fathom spending hours upon hours creating complex characters with well-fleshed-out backstories only to perpetually make their lives miserable. I simply couldn't do it. This is why I write absurdist short fiction. So I can tell the tale of the woman who has kidneys the size of kidney beans, or the scientist searching for a cure for sad cow disease, or the mountain climber who ascended their way out of the uncanny valley, without having to delve into the whole conflict thing. But the problem is, when you tell people you're a writer, they always ask a follow-up. So what do you write? They do this because they fancy themselves as readers. And they are inevitably disappointed when you tell them that you write absurdist short fiction. They're all like, what the hell is that? They don't even seem to care when you mention that you won the 2014 Absurdist Weekly Review Flash Fiction Award. Then I got a brilliant idea. Perhaps if I sought out a bad relationship, like a really bad one. It would force me to have to deal with conflict in my real life, which then, in turn, might help me with my novel writing. After much consideration, I decided the best bet was to seek out an indie rock guitarist, since guitarists are notoriously egotistical, and indie rockers are all emotionally detached and unbearably ironic. The plan seemed foolproof. After paging through the listings of the local alternative weekly music section, I decided to target a band called the Orange Dolphin Puppet Revival, for obvious reasons. At their show, before they took the stage, I saw this guy with disheveled hair painstakingly tuning like 4 or 5 guitars. I figured he had to be the one. So I went up to him and I kissed him, completely out of the blue. He asked me my name and I said Kat. He told me his was Eric. I asked him if he felt like his name was some kind of underlying cause of him becoming an indie rocker. Perhaps if his parents had named him Rick, he might be playing rockabilly or speed metal instead. Eric didn't find this funny, but he still seemed interested in me, probably because I was all flirty. I bit my lip, fidgeted with my sweater, giggled a lot, basically acted like an insecure 9th grader. Many supposedly grown men seemed to like this. After the show, I took Eric home with me. I was hoping he would, fuck me, then ignore me, then say mean things about me when I asked why he wasn't returning my calls. Not because I'm a masochist. Okay, maybe a little bit because I'm a masochist, but mostly as part of my self-imposed experimental overcoming conflict avoidance therapy. But that didn't happen with Eric. Instead, he just sort of followed me around like a lost puppy dog for about a week or two. He opened doors for me, did all my dishes, and so on, when what I really, really needed from him was for him to treat me really, really badly, so that I could become a novelist. Finally, I told Eric that I wasn't interested in him. He was crushed. As he was sobbing on my shoulder, I expressed my surprise, because indie rockers are supposed to be aloof hipsters, detached from real-life emotions. Which only made him cry more, because according to Eric, the Orange Dolphin Puppet Revival are not an indie rock band after all. They're an emo band, which is apparently a totally different thing. Everything turned out okay, though. Eric wrote a song called Kat about how I had broke his heart, and it reached as high as number 23 on the college radio charts. And my new book, 99 Erics, about dating 99 different pathetic guys named Eric, is currently ranked 25,097 on Amazon, which is pretty good for a collection of absurdist short stories. So that is Eric number 1, the first chapter. So let me take a sip of water. I hope everything is still going out there fine, no technical difficulties, and people are able to watch this and hopefully enjoy it. So that was a short story. It wasn't a chapter, but it was a short story. The thing I really liked the most about it was kind of this different voice, and I really like Kat Cataclysm. I think of her more. She's a character who's fleshed out now, but I really like the voice, and it's kind of like the silly surrealness. It resembles a lot of my song lyrics. If you haven't heard my song lyrics, I was one of those indie rockers, guitarists that I am making fun of there. So I'm allowed to identify as an indie rock guitarist. I'm allowed to make fun of them, us. Okay, so I should also add that I didn't get the writing job, but that short story got me the next step. But I didn't end up getting it, which is fine, because I like writing what I want to write rather than writing what someone else came up with. And so I just kind of, with this voice Kat, I just started writing random little things, whatever came into my head. So it was just kind of this lark, really. And over time, I found some themes came up again and again. One of the major themes for kind of obvious reasons is kind of writing about writing, because I was definitely thinking about my failed attempt at a novel, which was obvious in that short story. And also I write for a living, and I think about language all the time and kind of the writing process. And it was kind of fun to write about that. to share some of my ideas, sometimes sincerely, but other times sarcastically or satirically. So that was a lot of fun. So the next chapter I'm going to read is actually something along that line. And I should also say that Kat, in addition to being an absurdist short story writer, so she is a writer. That's like kind of a main part of the book. She's writing this book. And then I also ended up making her an ex-linguist. And that kind of is explained prior to this chapter, but it comes up in this chapter. And so this chapter is, let me find it. It's simply called Like. So you've probably noticed that I like to use the word like. It's a generational thing, I suppose. If you lived any part of your childhood in the 80s, 90s, or zeros, then you have simply been socialized to say words like fairly often. As a writer, I find the word like to be quite useful, as it can help make whatever follows it more pronounced or emphatic, much like a brief pause before the punchline of a joke. And when I'm talking, sometimes I will still be formulating how to phrase what I'm going to say, and I'll drop in a like to give my neurons a few extra microseconds to construct the most thoughtful and judicious sentence possible. No harm, no foul. While like seems completely harmless to me, many people really and truly dislike like. In fact, they downright hate it. And they will make fun of your speech patterns and dissect your usage of like in a patronizing manner, like in a bad way. For example, about 20 minutes into our date, Eric number 13, because all the Erics have numbers, they're numbered. I'm gonna switch glasses too, because I think that will be better for the reading part of this. There we go. Okay, see, it's kind of almost the exact same glasses, but slightly different color. Matches the banana slug a little bit better, maybe. Okay, so anyway, for example, about 20 minutes into our date, Eric number 13, the one who liked to collect sand dollars, said to me, "Boy, you sure do use the word like a lot." First off, I'm a girl, not a boy. Second, yes, I like. Is that a problem? Well, it makes you sound unintelligent and unsure of yourself. Actually, I'm quite smart and sure of myself, thank you very much. Perhaps the problem is not my use of the word like, per se, but rather people like you who automatically assume that people who use the word like must be insecure or unintelligent. Look, I'm just trying to be helpful here. Many people simply find it annoying when people abuse the word like. It's a really bad verbal habit, much like how people abuse the word literally. You just used the word like in your last sentence. But that was a simile. That's how you're supposed to use the word like, to compare things to one another. But fruit flies like bananas. What? Time flies like an arrow, but fruit flies like bananas. It's a classic sentence that demonstrates syntactic ambiguity. Both the words flies and like have multiple meanings, but people generally have no problems understanding which meanings are relevant based upon how they are used and the surrounding words. Similarly, if I were to say, your understanding of how language works is like really poor, most people would comprehend that I'm simply using the word like in a third different way, namely to emphasize how poor your understanding of language is. But you can't just go around making up new meanings for words willy-nilly. Language has rules. But most people have been using the word like to emphasize what follows for several decades now. On top of that, definitions are always changing, because language is flexible and always evolving. Take the word literally. It used to mean in a literal or strict sense. But now people use it in a second way that is more figurative and metaphorical. So now, much like most words in the English language, literally has more than one meaning. Some words have like a dozen or more different meanings depending on the context. So what's the big deal? It's needlessly confusing. No, it isn't. You're just acting needlessly confused. Okay, this date is literally over. Eric stood up from his chair and reached for his backpack, which was literally filled with sand dollars. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet and rummaged through it for actual dollars to cover his half of the bill. This being the second date wherein Eric had walked out on me in a huff, I was literally beside myself. So I kind of sort of lashed out at him as he was preparing to go. Fine, be that way. Leave, why don't you, Mr. Inflexible Language Sand-Dollar Guy? See if I care. Because I literally do not care. Not one iota. But obviously I do care, given that I'm raising my voice in the middle of this crowded restaurant right now. I was just so-called abusing the word literally just then, just to troll you. And I refuse to stop there. In fact, now that the word literally has been destroyed in your eyes, I plan to make it my life's ambition to destroy the word verbatim next. So 5 years from now, whenever you hear somebody somewhere say something verbatim, you will have no idea whether the person in question literally said it, insinuated it, and or whether the person recounting the story is merely paraphrasing or parodying what they said. So there. So yeah, so that was like the chapter. Like, let me another sip of water. I hope you're doing well out in TV land. Okay, so just a couple more things about it, and then I'll read one last chapter that's kind of a bit of a longer chapter. So because I found myself like writing about writing, and because in the original short story I had this like just this random like one-off line where Kat writes a book called 99 Erics, I figured that would be like a great chance to like a great framework for it, that like, okay, she's going to write a book called 99 Erics, and that was kind of fun because she gets to have like these conversations with these random people who she's put into dates with, just because it's hard to find people named Eric to date. You know, she describes her strategies for doing it, but yeah, it's kind of it's kind of this thing. So I got to write a lot of dialogue, which I liked writing the dialogue that comes to me way more naturally than just describing things. It was also fun because, as any of you who knows like kind of my writing, my nonfiction writing, I like to write about gender and sexuality. And so it was a way for me to make some observations about that kind of in a more fun, a fun way than kind of I get to when I'm writing nonfiction. So that was a fun aspect of it. And I mentioned that throughout the book, I write about different things. So like, here's like a little list of things related to writing that, sorry, these are my notes. See, and I have a laptop in a laptop. So I could like maybe point these at each other and we could like have an infinite loop. Okay. So like some of the things that like the chapters cover things like writer's block. Actually, it literally covers my writer's block after Trump was elected in 2016. I wrote a chapter about that. But funny, even though it wasn't funny when it happened. Heroes' journeys, unfortunate book covers. This one's awesome, but other book covers, sometimes people have unfortunate book covers. I'm lucky I don't. I like all my book covers. Failing at writing sex scenes, that's a good chapter. Misplacing Chekhov's gun, academic journal writing, book tours, fan fiction and gender swap fiction, writing listicles, manic pixie dream girls, and bad writing advice from curmudgeon authors who needlessly hate adverbs and semicolons. So these are all some of the things that you'll find in there, along with kind of funny stories about her dating people and random digressions about all sorts of different things. So let's see, there's one more thing I wanted to say. I should say this. So just like time-wise, so 2014 is when I came up with the idea, late in 2014. I kind of finished it up mostly in 2017, and then I kind of like wrote an additional chapter and kind of traded it with people who are awesome alpha readers and beta readers, and people who helped me a lot with that. And in the middle of it, around 2016, I got invited to speak at Sister Spit, to be a part of that tour, which was awesome, and I got to read some of these. And for that, I made this chapbook called General Surgery and Surgeons General, which was my attempt to like write things that Kat wrote. So like half of this is chapters that ended up being in 99 Eric, but others are just like her short stories and slam poems. And the reason why I mention this is because she, Kat Cataclysm, is kind of like me, a recovering slam poet. And the last chapter of this chapbook, the chapter 10 of the real book, I think, is, it was originally, in this it's called Poetry Slammed. I think in this book it's called Publishers Clearinghouse. That is both, I kind of get to make fun of, have fun with like the publishing business and kind of writers trying to get publishers and everything. So I got to like play around with that, but also I got to talk about my experiences as a slam poet, which if some of you may know that I used to do that. I did a lot of trans-centric slam poetry. Some of it is up on my YouTube account, which you could look. That's where actually the archived version of this book reading will eventually be. So check out my YouTube account. You can find that on my website too. It was really an incredible couple years, but then it was just like at a certain point, I felt like it was a very limiting genre for me, not for everyone, but for me. And I got to get some of those ideas into this last piece I'm going to read. So I'm going to read from that chapter, and then I'll just kind of summarize or bring things to a conclusion. So let me take one more sip. Okay. When I speak to writers about my book, 99 Erics, one of the first things they often ask is, so who's your agent? Because according to writer's lore, agents fulfill the mythical gatekeeper role. They supposedly recognize your true genius and passionately believe in you, so much so that they do all the things that you would rather not be bothered with. They shop your book around to publishers, negotiate your contract, contact media on your behalf, etc., so that you don't have to worry your pretty little head about such trivial matters, because you are a genius, and you need to focus 100% of your energy and attention on your next groundbreaking artistic endeavor, which is most likely a young adult novel, wherein the protagonist befriends a wizard, or vampire, or angel, or something of that ilk, who ultimately helps them unlock their true potential and enables them to save the world. Because wizards are to insecure teenagers, as agents are to hopeful writers. So unsurprisingly, these waiting to be discovered writers are always shocked when I tell them that I don't have an agent. Nor do I need one, because I am totally DIY. Nor do I bother indiscriminately sending off manuscripts to publishers in the hopes that they will become interested in my work. Such an approach is pointless, as your manuscript merely becomes one stack of papers on top of a much larger stack of other stacks of papers. No, what you really need to do is to make yourself stand out from all the other wannabe writers out there. So here's what I do to stand out. I carefully research book publishers in order to find one or two who seem to be a perfect match for my work. Then, I seek out the home address of the acquisitions editor for that publishing house. Then, I put together an impromptu poetry slam for them on their front lawn. For those readers not in the know, poetry slams are basically open mic poetry readings, except for the fact that several random members of the audience are chosen to judge the poet's performances, Olympic style, on a scale from 1 to 10. Of course, this means that I furiously have to promote the event in order to wrangle enough performers and audience members to make it an unforgettable show. But it's all worth it, because it really does get me noticed. Now, I know some of you are likely thinking, Kat, isn't that kind of creepy and stalkery to show up at a publisher's home with a poetry slam-sized contingent of people? I really don't think so. It's not like I go around peeking in prospective publishers' windows or following them around from place to place. I am simply giving them a gift, the gift of poetry slam. Some have suggested to me that even if said poetry slam does not strictly constitute stalking, it is nevertheless non-consensual. And I'm like, but of course it is. Poetry slams are supposed to be non-consensual. It's in their very nature. I cannot tell you how many times I've been at my local bar, drinking an IPA and writing in my journal, as you do, when all of a sudden these people come in, pouring in, and they start setting up for poetry slam without even asking my permission. But hey, when at the bar, do as the bar does. So of course I sign up to read. And I start getting all excited about reading my newest thing. You know, that fresh piece. The one that's super intense and visceral and confessional and like totally fucking real. But unfortunately, it's also super duper in need of major edits. After all, I just wrote it today. Literally only moments ago, as the non-consensual poetry slam organizers were first barging into this bar without even asking me first. And naturally, I can't see how blatantly in need of editing this hand-scrawled behemoth of raw literature is, because it's my fresh piece, the one that expresses all the emotions that I'm currently feeling. And don't you dare try to edit the emotions that I'm currently feeling right now at this very moment. At most poetry slams, at most open mics, the ones that are not poetry slams, this is no big deal. You can just get up on stage and read the fresh piece, and people will solemnly listen to you. This is probably because they're just biding their time until it's their turn to read their fresh piece. But at poetry slams, it's different because of the fucking judges who will give you like 5.8s or 6.2s for your work. Work which in your heart of hearts, you know really and truly deserves a 10, or at least a 9.2. And the kicker is that these so-called judges might not even be writers like yourself. In fact, they are likely to be like fucking lay people. Like the guy who gave me, the 5.8 is probably just some dude bro who just so happened to be in the bar before the slam even started. Just drinking an IPA, but sans writer journal. Hell, it probably wasn't even an IPA. It was most likely a Budweiser or Coors or some shit. Come to think of it, I'll bet you that this guy showed up at the bar with his dude bro pals to watch the football game that was on earlier. The one where the team named after a subpopulation of Northern Europeans, infamous for their conquering and pillaging, metaphorically slaughtered a football team named after indigenous people who in real life were slaughtered, conquered, and pillaged by a more historically recent subpopulation of Northern Europeans. Not to mention the fact that the latter's team name is totally racist. So how is this half-drunk dude bro, who only moments ago was metaphorically rooting for Northern Europeans to slaughter Native Americans, ever possibly going to understand my sex-positive feminism-rooted, absurdist, yet highly confessional fresh piece? Not a chance. Of course, my slam score probably would have been higher if it weren't for the fact that the woman who went on before me was like the most polished poet ever. She not only had her piece memorized, but she was making all these grand gestures with her hands, and her facial expressions were really emotive. And by the end of the piece, there was just this whole call and response thing that just organically developed between her and the audience. And you find yourself joining in the call and response, and you're like totally loving this woman until you realize, holy crap, I have to go on immediately after her. And in the wake of all the calls and responses and laughter and cheers, not to mention all the spontaneous snapping that started up, my fresh piece ends up being greeted with absolute unadulterated silence. A silence that feels so respectful. It makes you feel like the audience is really listening intently when it happens at non-poetry slam open mics, but which is a clear sign that your fresh piece is going over like a lead balloon when it happens at a poetry slam. So then you decide to seriously commit yourself, and you start memorizing and choreographing all your pieces, even the mediocre ones. And you start going to slams all the time. The San Francisco Slam on Sundays, the Berkeley Slam on Wednesdays, the Oakland Slam on Thursdays, and so on. Plus, going to other occasional non-poetry slam open mics, where now you suddenly totally shine, because now you are the published performer. And at the poetry slams, your scores definitely improve quite a bit. But eventually, you come to realize that there's an upper limit for you. A poetry slam glass ceiling. Because it turns out that Sorry, because it turns out that slam audiences really only want to hear one of three types of poem. The really funny one, the righteous political one, and the overcoming adversity one. And you don't like to talk about politics anymore because you are a depressive progressive. And your life coping mechanism is to not talk about the adversity you have faced. And you think your poems are really funny, but they're more surreal and subversive, and the audience only seems to get straightforward vanilla humor. And your most hilarious piece is the one wherein you casually mention that time when you were at a party having a conversation with your ex, her current partner, your current partner, and your current partner's other partner. And you make your former US Surgeon General C. Ever Coop joke about how, when he said, when you have sex with someone, you are having sex with everyone they have had sex with in the last 10 years, and everyone they and their partners have had sex with in the last 10 years, end quote. And how, when he said that, he probably never imagined all of you hanging out at the same party, talking and laughing with one another. And it's a pretty funny joke, you think, except that a big chunk of the audience has no idea who C. Ever Coop is. And on top of that, you start to notice that the audience, who had been laughing along quite boisterously to your piece, are not laughing so much anymore. And you realize this is because you have just invoked polyamory. And the audience is now thinking, oh my God, this person is not like me after all. I can no longer relate to them as a normal human being. Or maybe they're thinking, this is hilarious, but if I laugh along too loudly, my friends will suspect I'm polyamorous myself. Either way, the response is tepid from there on out. And at that moment, it becomes clear to you that you have just wasted 2 years of your life honing your poetry slam skills, when what you always wanted to do all along was to become a novelist, albeit one who eventually settles for being a critically acclaimed absurdist short story fiction writer and self-proclaimed faux novelist. And poetry slam has not helped you toward this end goal. I mean, at the slams, some people will cheer you on, appreciate your work. So it's easy to presume that you are building up a following there. But the truth is, these people are not really your fans. They follow the poetry slam, not you. And when you stop showing up at the slams and you instead become the featured writer at some absurdist-focused and or polyamory-friendly literary event, these people will not show up. Believe me, I know firsthand. So you can spend the next 3 to 4 months crying into your IPA, lamenting those 2 wasted poetry slam years of your life. Or, if you're clever and marginally entrepreneurial like me, you can exploit poetry slam instead. How? By becoming a poetry slam organizer yourself. That way, those slam goers, they become your followers. And if you strategically coordinate your poetry slams to occur on the front lawn of your potential future publishers, not in a creepy, stalkery way, but as a gift, well then, the more power to you. So there's a pause in the chapter. I'm going to take a water break. This is how I met my editor, Mario. He loved my gift of poetry slam, even called it a hoot. Impressed, he asked to read a copy of my 99 Eric's manuscript in progress. I didn't hear back from him for 4 weeks, which was a complete mindfuck. I mean, the first week was no big deal, because he has to read the damn thing. During week 2, I constantly was checking my email and voicemail to no avail. By week 3, I was starting to think, oh my God, I must be a sucky writer who's written the worst faux novel in progress ever. And of course, this triggers an existential crisis, and I decide to just quit writing and go back to grad school to finally get my PhD in linguistics. I even began applying to grad schools, and the applications invariably asked me to write an essay about a time in my life when I experienced failure and what I learned from that experience. And I really, really wanted to write about my experience failing at poetry slams because of the polyamorous content of my poems, and how, from that experience, I learned how to exploit the genre of poetry slam in order to obtain a publishing deal for myself. But then I realized that I seemingly failed to get said publishing deal. And I wasn't sure that I had learned any lessons from that, at least not yet. But then, thankfully, during week number 4, after I'd already made peace with the fact that I was a failed slam poet and a failed author who would never get back into grad school again after failing the first time, Mario called to invite me out to lunch to discuss my manuscript. At that lunch, Mario spoke glowingly about 99 Erics. He absolutely loved it. But then he suggested that maybe I rework it into more of a young adult novel. You know, set in some post-apocalyptic future, where the population is divided up into 5 or so factions or districts or divisions. That's it, divisions. And perhaps these divisions, could be based upon the 5 senses. They could have names like the retinals, auditors, olfactors, gustators, and the tactiles. And each division has a specialized role in society based on the one sense that they are most proficient at. And our teenage protagonist, who has a vaguely exotic name, perhaps something like catnip, is born into the tactiles, who are the least respected division because they are also touchy-feely. And of course, there is some sort of ritual that young people of every division must participate in, during which catnip begins to realize that she transcends these divisions somehow. Perhaps because she has some sort of sixth sense, like maybe a sense of humor, or timing, or fashion sense. Who knows? The possibilities are endless. And over the course of the trilogy, because it has to be a trilogy, if not longer, it becomes clear that catnip is the chosen one who overthrows the dystopian overlords and unites all the divisions. So that's Mario's spiel, and after his spiel, I stared blankly at him for a minute before asking, but what about the whole dating 99 people named Eric part? Well, maybe there could just be one Eric. Maybe he's a bully from another division, and he and catnip fall in love, but you know, a chaste sort of romantic love. No sex, of course, since this is a YA novel. But that's fucking inane. Sex is a vital part of life for many of us, like eating or breathing or thinking and the like. Why would I want to write a YA novel if I'm not allowed to discuss sex at all? Well, because YA novels sell far better than absurdist faux novels about dating an inordinate number of men who just so happen to be named Eric. Plus, imagine the film rights. But whatever happened to sex sells? Sex does sell, but only if it's done in a sensationalistic or scandalous way. Believe me, the audience really wants to feel dirty and ashamed after reading about sex. But Kat, when you write about sex, you make it sound like a mundane part of everyday life that we shouldn't be ashamed of. And that particular angle on sex doesn't sell so much. Well, if I agree to write a YA novel without the sex, could I at least use profanity? No, of course not. Don't be silly. How about killing people? Could my protagonist kill people? Like lots of people? Sure, no problem. So Mario and I eventually compromised. I signed a 2-book publishing deal, 99 Erics by Kat Cataclysm in its uncensored form, followed by my forthcoming YA novel, The Senses Ceremony, published under my pen name, Kathleen Kennings. Ooh, and I almost forgot, between those 2 book releases, I plan to self-publish a chapbook of all my old slam poems, tentatively titled General Surgery and Surgeons General. The end. So, so basically that's a little sampling from the book. Interestingly, the YA novel then kind of like disappears from the book, except at the very, very end. It makes a reappearance. And that was another fun thing in writing this book. I started out, there was no outline, there was nothing, and I just started writing. And then as I would write, a lot of the chapters would kind of call back to each other. And so that was fun. So it was a very fun book to write, and I hope you give it a chance. And once again, go to juliaserano.com. JuliaSerano. And yeah, please check it out, download free chapters. And also while you're at the webpage, don't forget to check out September 22nd if you're on any of my social media accounts, you can find links to that. Please come out to that event. That's going to be completely different. Once again, that's going to be the bisexuals, weirdos, and unusually queer book characters themed episode. Normally, this is kind of one bad thing about living in the virtual world rather than the real world. I can't really take questions because this is like a one-way channel. But if you send me messages on social media and such, if you have a burning question, I can try to answer it there, or maybe answer that question at the end of the next book reading. But for now, I will bid you adieu. I don't know what adieu is, but I bid you it, and have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. Okay, goodbye.